My name is on the screen. Awesome. So my name is on the screen. My information is on the screen. We are starting this series now. We're switching it just from COVID because we did COVID updates every week. And now that everybody has gotten the hang on how to do COVID at the workplace, and all of you I know have a COVID-19 prevention program in place, that it is bulletproof. Now we are ready to move on to more information and safety updates that we will be bringing to you every month. Today, I want to talk about a very important topic. So very close to my heart are two of the most injury causing topics at work. And one of those is ergonomics, repetitive motion injury. So I love going out to the work sites and taking videos and then bringing this information for analysis and then really bringing it back to the workers so that we can improve your programs, your ergonomic programs, your stretching programs, and your repetitive motion injury prevention program. So that's one. And the second one is the fall prevention for your business. So fall prevention is one of the major things that will save money for your company. So it really is in these two things, the ergonomics portion of your programs and the fall prevention, because that's where we see the majority of fatal and non-fatal injuries. And that's what's causing your XMOD to go up, and it's driving your workers' compensation costs up all the time. Incident investigation would be my number 3, because if you don't learn from your own lessons, it really is a problem. It really is a problem because we are not, we teach it to everyone, our children, we teach it to our friends. We say, hey, didn't you learn from that mistake? Why are you doing the same thing over and over again? And in business, we only learn from our mistakes if we really truly analyze and we have a good procedure for incident investigation. And remember, we don't call it accident because accidents just happen randomly, where incidents could have been prevented. And OSHA stands at a point of view where we do believe that 99% it's actually 98% of all incidents are preventable, and only 2% could have not been foreseen. So another disclaimer, this is for information purposes only. It may not apply to your situation specifically, but we all grow. This is a win-win safety update employer series. What I want you to get from this is gems to take to the work site, to break that gap between the practices that you do at work and the programs, the beautiful programs that you write down and you put together for the safety of your workers. So I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer. Sometimes we do talk about safety issues related to the health of workers, but I want to make sure that I do emphasize I do not practice any of the healing arts. And also, I am not a lawyer. So if you see me say, well, and you have to go and appeal it and make sure that you bring it to the administrative law judge, and all of that is with the concept that I am a consultant. And I'm very grateful to UCLA, UCI, Southern California Education and Research Center for hosting this webinars. So thank you so much. Our learning objectives today is making sure that everyone mentions and knows at least 2 ways to recognize fall hazards at your fixed and non-fixed places of employment. And I'm going to focus today at falls from heights, because I had a webinar. Maybe we will do this coming up. But we did this last year where we reviewed falls at same level or slip, trip, and fall hazards. So today I want to focus at falls from heights. And I want to review also the portable ladder safety OSHA requirements, because I find in my current practice that a lot of my clients, or people that come to be my client, businesses that come to be my clients, are lacking a sturdy program for safety when working with portable ladders. It's one of the most dangerous items that you will have. I have a quick video to show you where I love this man, how he explains it. And he does start by saying, hey, do you know that you may have at your house something even more dangerous that a circular saw, or one of these very dangerous pieces of equipment that sometimes you think you would only find in manufacturing, etc., that could cause amputation? No, he says ladders are the most dangerous item that you have sitting in your places of employment. So we do need to review that, and so that you bring it back, because everybody on this call, every single one of you has a ladder sitting somewhere. You have access to a ladder, and if you've never been trained and you fall at work, you are failing to put together a program that includes that issue of an untrained person having access to a portable ladder, right? So a lot of us think this is just an issue for construction workers. It is not. It's an issue for anyone that has access to a ladder at work. And with that, the last thing I want to discuss is requirements for passive and active fall protection systems. And what that means, I'm going to briefly kind of highlight some of the issues and some of the most confusing things that we see out there while we walk your places of employment. So share your experience, make sure you send us your comments, chat with us. And if you want to have a specific question answered and we don't get to it, or maybe after the whole 45-minute, 50-minute training today, you this afternoon or at work, you think of a question related to fall prevention, please do let us know. Send your question. We've had questions that are very technical in the past submitted by email to Lindsay. So thank you so much, Lindsay, for always being on top of these things. She sends them to me, we answer them because it's impossible to know it all. Safety is a huge, very broad topic, and we are better at some things than others. So with that in mind, let's move to why fall prevention. So there are some very, very powerful reasons as to why tackle fall prevention when we have workers working at heights, right? And when we say at heights, we're talking about any elevation. And then we're going to talk about some of these trigger heights, right? Because it starts at certain different requirements per state or federal requirements. So we'll talk about that when I get to those very valuable pieces of information in the regulation. But why fall prevention? If we just look at the total deaths in California, and the latest statistic is from 2020, okay, the number is 463. So that's the amount of workers that died doing their job in California in 2020. And it's really not good because we haven't gotten a handle on these deaths. It always goes from 360, 370 to 400. So it's a lot of people that, you know, in the morning as they're eating cereal with their families, they step out the door and they never come back to see their children. So this is a serious matter. And you can see how fall slip strips are 99 of those injuries, right? So when we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we don't talk about just California, we're going to take a look at the number of fatal work injuries in the construction industry by selected events or exposure. So this is construction, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics has lots of great information. But basically, falls are the number one way to die, or that workers die in the construction industry. And in general industry or overall is the second most common way of dying, because the first one would be collisions or vehicle collisions here in California. So as you could tell in your previous chart, transportation incidents. So raise your hand if you're driving a company vehicle, right? That is one of the most dangerous or one of the number one way of dying here in California while you're doing your job. Transportation incident. So a good sturdy defensive driving program will do if you continue to tweak it and improve it. And fall strips, slip strips are the second way, right? But in construction is the number one way of dying. Remember, in construction, we do have something called the Focus 4, because OSHA came up with 4 things that cause death in the construction industry, and they're most prevalent. And those are: number 1, falls. Second would be electrocution. Third, struck by. And the last one, caught between and struck by. And so those are the Focus 4 for construction. And we really do need to develop procedures and go through the hierarchy of controls to prevent these types of injuries and incidents at the workplace. So with that in mind, that's kind of like the background as to why we go over preventing falls from heights, right? And remembering that no matter what the year, it's been really hard for our nation to really decrease that number. So this is the graph from 2016 to 2020. So in 5 years, you see that the numbers are really pretty much the same. The only time we saw a decrease, I think, was back in 2008. And that had to do not with how much better we got in preventing falls from heights, but that we were in a recession and there were less people out there working. And so we decreased the amount of people dying from falling because we didn't have as many people working. So in reality, it's been really hard. And some of those things have to do also with the lack of incident analysis at a national or nationwide level. We don't have a lot of information that is anonymous that companies are willing to share in regards to why people are falling. So it's hard to learn from those lessons. Internally, though, I do highly encourage that you make a good analysis anytime you have a near miss or you have a fall in order to improve your programs and to really look at what were the things that went wrong. We reviewed this last month as to the top 10 most frequently cited violations. And the first one has to do with fall protection for construction industry. The second one had to do with respiratory protection that was increased by the fact that there was a requirement that was brought by COVID-19. Then we have ladders as the third most frequently cited violation. And that's the reason why I need to bring it up and highlight it today and talk about how can you go about becoming compliant. And then we have hazard communication, which is the work with chemicals. Then is the work on scaffolds or elevated platforms. And then the next one would be the sixth top most frequently cited by OSHA is the training portion for fall protection in the construction industry, followed by lockout, tagout, then face and eye protection, lack of the personal protective equipment as required by whatever your people are doing. And then industrial powered trucks, forklifts, etc. That's number 9. And then number 10 would be issues of machine guarding. So we do have an emphasis program regarding amputation. But as you can tell, falls continue to be historically the most frequently cited by OSHA in California and nationwide. In 2019, you can just see the same items that I showed you in this graphic. You could see it repeated every year. Just the number changes a little bit. It goes down or up. The same item moves in a different order, but they're about the same every year. So we did have a new rule that came out in 2016 regarding walking working surfaces and personal fall protection. And the new rule came in place federally. So for those of your establishments that are under federal jurisdiction, you should be following this new rule. But California had a advisory committee meeting back in, when was it? February 2020. And there was not all of the things and not all of the changes were adopted, but some of the proposed rulemaking is on their website. And that's why I put the link here so that you can go and visit that page, which is in the Cal OSHA website. Sometimes takes a lot of clicking to find it, but you will for sure find it. I'm gonna share with you real quick. And what I like about the fact that the Occupational Safety and Health Standard Board, which is where you will find this information. So if you are having a hard time and you did not get a hold of this presentation, you just have to go to the main tabs and go to the boards, right? And you will find there the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Board, which is the page I'm on. And the Walking Working Surfaces Standard, the meeting was in February 2020. And then when you look at the regulation, it's a little bit like what we've been studying and going through with COVID-19. They always post the proposed regulation in PDF format. And they always give the post-committee meeting documents. And in some of those, as I looked at them, they're heavily focused on the issues about fixed ladders, and some of the definitions changed. But this is just proposed and it hasn't been approved. So some of the things are not the same with federal OSHA. And so you would have to go, and what I do many times, so I give you tips. If you don't know if something is required, just go to the proposed regulation and find out what it says. Then go to the federal OSHA, find out what it says, and make your comparison. And you will see that, oh, maybe they're thinking of changing this, but it is not finalized. So this is, I believe that in the proposed regulation post-committee minute documents, they do inform you that in August 2021, there was another letter trying to see if more things were going to happen, if this changes, and the proposed regulation was going to pass. But we don't have any further information, and we don't have a date for the next advisory committee meeting. So you can actually see the upcoming advisory meetings in this same tab, and you will see that on June 9th, they had the firefighters, personal protective equipment, process safety management, July 27, 28. So that's where they meet, they go through their agenda, and they provide you with excellent documentation for you to review what was changed or what's coming up as a change. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then I'm going to talk about where do you get sturdy, good information that still stands today, that you have to look at as this is what goes, nothing has changed. This is still valid information. So I'm going to go back to my federal OSHA. Now, what is in the federal OSHA website? And you will find that there's an FAQ page that is really, really good that tells you what's the purpose of the final rule. And it basically has to do with aligning those general industry standards with the construction standards, so people wouldn't have all this confusion, especially if you were doing construction activities while working under the general standard, general industry standards. And then there's a list of all the major changes in the rule, and they have to do with fall protection flexibility. And one of those major changes, which hasn't taken place here in California, is the fact that we do require that guardrails are what you look into. So a passive way of fall protection versus just assigning personal fall protection to your workers. And here it's allowing for more flexibility because it allows you to choose from, personal fall protection systems, and it eliminates the existing mandate to use the guardrails as the primary fall protection method. The next one would be updated scaffold requirements, because there was a difference in trigger heights and now they just align it with construction. They also phase in ladder safety systems or personal fall arrest systems on fixed ladders, which I told you the actual proposed ruling in the California, the California regs have a lot of information there that will change. Phasing out the qualified climber for outdoor advertising because people were dying because they were not tied off. Rope descent systems and certification of anchorages and some of the requirements there. Personal fall protection system performance and use requirements, and adds requirements on performance, inspection, use, and maintenance of the systems. Inspection, which by the way, OSHA historically has been quite adamant and more strict about these things, to the point, where if a OSHA inspector drove by one of your sites and they looked at someone having lunch, to just kind of observe, waited, if that worker grabbed their harness and just put them on without an inspection, they would walk into the site and take a look at what was happening, because the inspections prior to use are required. So inspection of walking working surfaces requires that employers inspect those surfaces regularly as needed to correct, repair, or guard against those conditions, and the training. So there were some, the final rule required that they were trained and retrained as necessary. So a lot of these things are already in the Cal OSHA requirements, but let's go back to where do we find all the information that we still rely on here in California. And that would be, there's a beautiful fact sheet that Cal OSHA has put together. And I'm going to get to that one in a moment. I just want to talk about that first objective that we discussed in the beginning, that was, how can you identify fall hazards? And the answer continues to be the same as I have always told you, and that's walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk, but get boots on the ground, go out there, look at your sites. And remember, if a hazard is not identified, it cannot be addressed. So teach your workers, talk to them, ask them, what do you see here? What do you think this is happening? Why are we allowing these things to happen? One of the most common violations that I see in small businesses and small warehouses is exactly what you see in this picture. And I love that OSHA has a whole case study about this. So it's a worker unsafely pulling inventory on a raised pallet. And the reason this is not allowed is because he can very easily slip and fall, right? So the forklifts are designed for merchandise, to lower and move merchandise, so to handle material, but not to get people on them. They're not designed for that purpose. Nevertheless, you can purchase a cage that it is compliant, or you can actually change the type of equipment that you're using. So instead of that, you should be using a Tourette truck, which is this first picture here, and the one in the middle, which allows the worker to wear an actual fall restraint type of fall protection, and it allows to go up and down in racking systems that are really, really high and very narrow as well. Or purchase a system where a worker can tie off and be raised in a compliant cage, as in the last picture. So as you walk your floors, once again, what do you see? Well, there's a mezzanine there, and the access is a wooden ladder, and the wooden ladder has a split member. So you can see cracking. You have to really get rid of that ladder, especially one of the questions here as you walk is, how often do workers go up there? When do you use this ladder? And then the answer was no one goes up there. We don't use this mezzanine. We have enough storage down here. So get rid of that. Don't give access to this mezzanine. So no worker is tempted to go up to that mezzanine that you don't store anything, right? Because once you allow workers to go up there and store things or step onto that platform, it becomes a walking surface, and now you have to guard it, right? So as you keep walking, you see ladders that are not appropriately stored, because right there they're stored on material or merchandise that you have, and it can easily fall on someone that bumps into it, especially if you are pulling orders with a pallet jack or a forklift. That's going to bump into your ladder because it's not stored where it should be, and it should not be stored vertically but horizontally. Or you can purchase a rack system. They sell them with a chain to have easy access where you can stand up all of your ladders and you have them stored adequately. You also see that the ladders here do not have safety decals. And some of you think, why do we really have to have those? Yes, that's one of the most common issues with ladders, no safety decals on them. So now you don't even know what the capacity of the ladder is. You don't even know, because for the capacity, you know what, if you as a worker with your body weight and your tool belt and all the tools that you need to carry, if you will be a-okay to be on that ladder. It also tells you how to set it up. It also tells you what type of ladder is it. Is it aluminum? Is it fiberglass? What type of ladder you're working with, right? So more on hazard recognition. Walk the walk, take pictures, make sure the workers know, hey, why are you out there exposing yourself to a fall hazard when you already know that the actual guardrail system is missing the mid rail, right? One step backwards and you can easily fit through there and fall 5 floors. I think it was 5 stories down when I took that picture. Also, recognizing more of the hazards. There was a missing plank. I don't know if you can still tell, but in this area over here, you have a big opening from the working surface, which is the actual plank, to the face of the building because there was a missing plank. And also the worker was using the step ladder to remove some debris from the corner of the installation area right there on the face of the building. And when he set up his step ladder, he opened it fully, but he did not have enough space because there was a lot of drywall on the side. And so he had to support that ladder a little crooked. One foot of the ladder was on the windowsill and the other one was next to the pieces of drywall, right? And that exposed him. It's not only a violation because you're not setting up your ladder correctly, and setting up is one of those issues with ladders, but also because you are right next to a wall opening, exposing you to a fall through that missing plank, another violation on scaffolding requirements, which are all part of that hazard recognition as the key to abate hazards and to work safely. So keep walking, take a look as you arrive at your sites and you're in construction and you're dealing with scaffolding, have a competent person. So we're going to talk a little bit about what competent person means. It's huge. It's a huge issue, right? Because when I go out there to these sites, the first thing I ask of any worker, any crew member is, where is your competent person? And they will look at me like, what? So if they don't know what that is, that's the part of comprehensive training when we're talking about when we talk about issues with fall protection, scaffolding, etc. And all the scaffolding regulations require that a competent person, and when we say competent, it's a definition that says someone that with the training experience, the knowledge, is able to recognize the hazards related to scaffolding and can stop work and has the authority to stop work if necessary because of the hazards he or she has found. So competent person need to be there whenever there is somebody wearing a personal fall protection system or when they are on scaffolding. That competent person is going to get to the site, start looking at the scaffolding system, seeing if it's nice and straight, seeing if the requirements for the type of scaffolding are being met, right? How the distribution of the load, the planking, the guide wires, the openings, how much space do we have from the front of the working platform to the building, what's allowed, because depending on the type of scaffolding will be 14 inches to 16 inches, etc. Competent person needs to walk the walk and discuss the hazards with the workers, make sure they're corrected before the workers get on the scaffolding or start wearing a personal fall protection system. Now, I'm talking about all sorts of hazards that you could encounter at your business, general industry or construction. We have another death that occurred because a worker was on this top of the hopper and there was crumbs of sugar that gave under his feet. So the sugar was hardened and it actually crumbled under his feet, and he actually ended up being stuck in the sugar hopper and being engulfed. But the where he stood, where it says employee was on top of the sugar here, that exposed them to a fall of 13 feet to the floor. And all of that, those are fall hazards that you will only recognize if you go out there and walk the walk and see what's happening. By the way, some of these documents that I'm showing will be found in the OSHA.gov. I have the link at the end of this presentation. I'll send them to you. So there's a lot of very interesting facts. This guy was working for this company only for 9 months. He did this task 2 to 3 times per a shift. And then the likely causes, there was no safety program, no site-specific work procedures. The hopper and chute openings were not guarded to protect from falling into the hopper. There was no safe method of walkway to reach the top of the hopper, and there was no safe work platform at the top. Workers had to reach a height of more than 13 feet to break up the sugar clumps. So I like that it gives you the likely causes of the incident. The supervisor, who was also a temporary worker, did not receive training in assessing potential workplace hazards. And many times when a temp worker comes with a supervisor, we leave it up to them, whatever they want to do, because, you know, that's why we hire them. We hire these workers with their supervisor. I have nothing to do with them. I just want them to do the job. But we must assure, and there's issues there about dual employment or multiple employer for Cal OSHA. In any case, OSHA is going to look at you and the temp agency, both employers, and may end up citing both. And then you have the issues of, once Cal OSHA puts all of that in a formal document, that will become evidence for third-party liability issues, lawsuits, etc. So don't do that. Once you work with a third party or outsourcing some sort of tasks because they're dangerous, make sure that these people have a sturdy safety program. And if you're going to supervise them, train them before they start the work. And if you're not going to supervise them, talk to the supervisor and see what type of training he's doing and if it's compliant with OSHA. So for that, you need to know what they need to have in place, right? How are you going to ask them if they're compliant if you don't even know what they should be compliant with? So that's why we talk about these issues and we discuss how to do this. So who conducts this hazard assessment? An assessment of your workplace must be conducted to identify fall hazards. So it is a requirement that the competent person is the one that addresses the hazards and documents the assessment. It could be as easy as for the scaffolding. Many times I find my foremen saying that they don't have a way to document it. The scaffolding has tags that are designed for this purpose, but let's say that they cannot find the tag because the scaffold directors did not place it. So it's still your actual responsibility to document that you assessed that portion of the scaffold that your workers are going to be on. So document it. You should have daily forms where you check that you did the hazard assessment and where you have a way of saying that you actually walk the walk and that you assess that scaffold or portion of the scaffold for any issues. And your name and the date and the time should be on it. Identify the best means to protect the employee from the hazard. So once it's identified, you need to think with a hierarchy of controls in mind. All of you know, I've been talking through this whole series about the hierarchy of controls. Where we talked about COVID, we said, you know, the best thing is to eliminate the hazard. That's why you sent everybody to work from home. But the second thing would be to substitute it for something less dangerous or do engineering controls that allow for that separation of the human being from the hazard. Same thing here. What are you going to do to actually protect the employee from the hazard? So you walked that scaffold and you saw a missing plank, you would want to replace it immediately and not allow the workers to step on it unless it has been replaced. Here are the key definitions I was talking to you about. So you have to be able to identify, the competent person needs to be able to identify those hazards. So he is competent enough. And remember, the key thing here is two things actually. One, it's you as a company representative who will assign a person to be the competent person. So you're going to say, okay, so-and-so, you will be the competent person on that site. You will be the competent person. So for most construction type of businesses, what I find is that they will assign a job title as the competent person for those sites because they have many non-fixed sites. But if you have a fixed site, then you would have a couple of people, depending on the number of shifts, etc. That would be your competent person, and the crew members, the workers underneath that person, know who that person is, so they can point at that person and ask questions and actually bring up to the attention of the competent person the hazards, so that that person can stop the work. Now, if you as an employer representative don't give this competent person the authority to stop work and say, huh, we cannot continue the work, we got to report it, we got to make sure that, you know, the scaffold directors get called so that they fix this area that is not, this is their scaffold, they get to change it, they get to modify it. So the corrective measure and the authority to stop work, that's part of who a competent person is. If you assign someone to be the competent person and they report the hazard, but they don't have the authority to stop work because the hazard is present, then the competent person is not there. That is not a good competent person, and you will be in violation of this requirement per OSHA standards. And then in regards to a qualified person, that would be one that by possession of recognized degrees, so many times is your engineers, right? The engineers or the people that have extensive knowledge, training, and they demonstrate the ability to solve or resolve problems. So they are not there to actually stop work when they determine there's a hazard. They're there to help you out and determine, you know, if this is going to be the correct loading capacity, for example, if you want to ask this qualified person about your anchorage points. So they have the knowledge, they will tell you if this is going to be something that will work. And these are people that have a recognized degree. So most of the time, those are engineers at your facilities. So there's two basic systems that I talked about in my learning objectives. Whenever you talk about falls and you go through the actual hierarchy of controls and you have to go all the way down to, okay, we got to look into engineering controls. We talk about passive systems for fall prevention, such as guardrails, safety nets, floor covers, catch platforms, etc. And then we talk about active systems that go all the way down in the hierarchy of controls, which is the personal fall protection. Why is it that they go all the way down in the hierarchy of controls? Because they're not as effective. When we say, you know, removing the hazard is the most effective way of preventing someone from getting hurt, we're talking about elimination or substitution, right? But when we go all the way down, the least effective way of protecting a worker is always providing them with a piece of personal protective equipment, in this case, a harness and connectors, and making sure that they follow a system for personal fall protection. And when that happens, the reason is the last alternative, or what we want to say, the least effective in the hierarchy of controls, is because it really depends on that human being and their level of training and expertise, and how good you get at giving them that knowledge and helping them understand how to use that PPE. And then on top of all of that, the actual, you know, mental disposition at the moment they're actually doing the task of putting on a piece of personal protective equipment. Many times we're distracted. Many times we have a lot of issues in our head, you know, family, financial, health, issues with our parents, aging parents, whatever it is that cloud our good judgment or what we're doing at the moment. And if that worker is not present, the PPE, the personal protective equipment that he or she is wearing, may not function as they were designed to, because there was a failure in the way it was set up, put on, what we say donning or doffing, or the way they put them on, or they were taking it off, or because they didn't inspect it, etc. So passive systems such as guardrails are the preferred system of fall protection. If passive systems cannot be utilized, then personal fall protection is required. And this is the part that hasn't changed for OSHA and has changed for federal, and it's in the rule as we showed in the FAQs for the OSHA.gov. Now I'm going to show you one of my favorite sheets. I know a lot of questions will come from this 2-page fact sheet by OSHA. But I do want to point out this should be your go-to in order to find some requirements for fall protection. So it does say the heading is fall protection in construction, but what you don't know is that it does include those fall protection requirements for the general industry. And the reason you know that is because anytime you have a standard number that starts with a 3, is going to be in the section, in the subchapter for general industry. So we have the OSHA requirements for the Title 8 California Code of Regulations, and that's what T8 CCR stands for construction. And you will see it all in the thousands. So 1541, 1610, all of those are construction standards, and anything in the 3,000 and above is going to be in the general industry. So we have for the selected construction, we have fall protection and excavation work, cranes and derricks in construction, construction of guardrails in the construction industry, general fall protection, personal fall arrest systems. And I love this sheet because it gives you a link to the actual requirement, right? And so for general industry, you have fall protection while working with aerial device. And this is anytime you have those cherry pickers, boom lifts, and you're putting your workers on these things. A lot of workers have died while working on these aerial devices because they were either failing to inspect and the emergency controls didn't work at the time they needed to be lowered to the floor, or because they were operating them during very windy weather, or because they tipped over because they decided that they could move the vehicle while the person was still in the bucket and raced, right? And so a lot of, or they were, catapulted out of that aerial device because unsafely driving over, let's say, uneven terrain while the worker was still in the basket and the aerial device was still they were still performing work. So a lot of issues with that, and the requirements are here. You have to have only authorized persons that operate the device. There's a lot of outsourcing or companies that will go out there and train your workers and provide them with an actual certification that they went through the aerial device training. And that's not a problem. What I do not like is that this is a general training, and what you need to make sure that your workers understand is the specifics of the jobs they're going to be doing while operating aerial devices. And that's where you, employer, start designing or putting together those safe work practices or standard operating procedures, however you want to call them, right? And hold on a second here. Okay, so the next one would be, so the first one was aerial devices. The next one was fall protection for whenever you're working on platform equipment. And then it talks about, guardrail is required. And that's the reason why you see scissor lifts with the guardrails. And then you start seeing violations such as workers, getting at the highest point with their scissor lift and now standing on the guardrails to achieve a greater height. And that's a common violation for OSHA. You need to read the requirements. It's all there. And there's some fact sheets for aerial lifts, and there's some fact sheets from OSHA for scissor lifts and other elevated platforms. Now there is the requirements for standard guardrails that go under 3209, and it does talk to you about different kinds and the actual requirements for distance between posts and what to do if you can't get that 42 to 45 height for the top, from the floor to the top rail, etc. So specifications here, right there. And the next one would be, so you see how we're going through construction and general industry in one fact sheet by OSHA. And I really do love that. So any elevated locations right here is for buildings, you have to provide with guardrails on all open sides of an enclosed elevated work locations, such as roof openings, open and glazed side landings, balconies, porches, platforms, runways, ramps. So how are you going to know when you need to install guardrails? Is when you out there boots on the ground, start walking the walk with this knowledge behind your back. You start taking a look at where are my employees standing. So if it's a platform or a runway where no one ever goes out there, there's no need for them to go out there. You don't need guardrails. You don't need fall protection because there's no exposure. So if a worker is not gonna be up there, so if you are walking your floor in a manufacturing setting and you see a runway up above, let's say 7 feet off the ground, and there is no way that your workers ever use that platform, there's no need for guardrails. But if there's maintenance to any of those components of your machinery and equipment, and you're going to be using any of these elevated workspaces, then you need to take a look at the requirement for guardrails, right? So working levels more than 30 inches above the floor, the ground, or other working areas of a building defined, and then it tells you where to look for these definitions. Need to also have guardrails. Where overhead clearance prohibits installation of a 2-inch guardrail, a lower rail can be installed, etc. So that's A, right? And then it gives you a ton of exemptions because it tells you that sometimes it's not feasible, or it tells you that you have to have access, and how you should do it has to do with protecting the worker with fall protection that may not be the guardrail. But if they're exposed, for example, open hearth and hot metal pouring platforms, they need to be guarded once that operation is done, for example. And then B, letter B, because we read A, exceptions, and then B. B says, B also has a ton of exceptions. Other elevated locations, the unprotected sides of elevated work locations that are not building on building structures where an employee can or is exposed to a fall of 4 feet or more. So that's the other trigger height. So we had the 30 inches up there in the previous paragraph, and then we have the 4 feet or more where you have to provide with guardrails, right? And then we have the other trigger height of 7.5 feet because of construction, right? 3212 then goes into floor openings, floor holes, skylights, roofs. There's a ton of regulations in regards to this. For example, if you have a skylight on top of a roof and a person is getting too close to this skylight and it's not protected, it has no safety system to actually prevent that person from falling, because sometimes there's protective coverings and nets associated. But the best, easiest way would be to just have railing around that skylight if the worker is going to get 6 feet or closer to that skylight, right? There's a lot to be said about roofs and floor openings that it is better explained in this part of the fact sheet, which says, for example, helpful safety information. Fall protection trigger heights must be observed at all times. It goes 2 stories or 30 feet, whichever is less, for connecting structural steel iron workers. 20 feet for most roofing work, 15 feet panelized roof systems, residential framing and roofing activities, work on 4-inch nominal or wider structural members and other than connecting steel, 7.5 feet work on unprotected platforms, scaffolds, or edges of structures. And this is what was also different from federal, which now it's aligned. They don't have that difference. Before, federal OSHA would say you don't need to have guardrails on a scaffold until you got to 10 feet of height. And now it's 6 foot because that's the rule federally. And here in California, historically, we've always had that trigger height of 7.5 feet of height. So you don't have to have guardrails on a scaffold that is, 6 feet or 4 feet on a construction site. Anything 7.5 and higher, you do need to have fall protection. Structural wood framing workers working near a leading edge must be protected from falls of 15 feet or more by one or more of these: guardrails, safety nets, personal fall protection system, parapets of at least 24 inches high, fall protection plan. So most roofing work requires fall protection over 20 feet. To work on residential tract homes requires fall protection on 15 feet. So do you see how this fact sheet really does sum up all of the requirements, trigger heights, etc., that you would find scattered all throughout this little blue regulations? So 100 percentile of protection from falls at all times, even when moving from point to point, must be provided while using personal fall protection. Sometimes this may require using 2 lanyards. Point-to-point travel on rebar is allowed without fall protection for heights up to 24 feet. In steel erection work, iron workers must use personal fall protection where fall distance exceeds 30 feet while performing structural steel connecting work, or 15 feet while performing work other than connecting. I don't know, when I see that 15-foot trigger height, I always think of, why is that? Is it because they're just tougher dudes or what? But those are the trigger heights. And in metal decking work, workers must be protected from falls of 15 feet or more by either guardrails, safety nets, personal fall protection, fall protection plan. And remember, each of these things has their requirements and specifications. Just for the use of safety nets, for example, we have a common issue of violation for the lack of training, because when you have a safety net as the type of fall protection, you actually need to go through the actual requirements for the fall protection, which is just safety nets. A little bit more examples on the 2 basic protection systems, like passive systems, guardrails. You have that roof there with the guardrails, and then you have the active systems. You have your ABCs, right? Your anchorage point, B, which is the body hardness, and C, your connectors. And there's a lot to be said on how to actually set up an active personal fall protection system. There's 2 types, the fall restraint and the fall arrest, which I have a lot of common confusion in that regard. So you have the arrest system, the restraint system, the positioning devices. There's a very cool video by Oregon OSHA in regards to the actual differences.
We see fall arrest and fall restraint talked about quite a bit, and it seems like there is some misunderstanding sometime between the two. When I'm working in fall restraint, what I like to describe that as, I'm like a dog on a leash. I have a fixed length connector going back to an anchor point that is set in such a way that when I'm using it and I have that extended out to its maximum length of travel, I can't get to that hazard. If I'm working next to an edge, I can't get my feet, I can't get my butt over that edge. There's no way I can fall. My system is actually set up to catch me and protect me before I have a chance to fall. My anchor points don't have to be as strong. My system is a lot easier to set up. It's a lot easier to train for. And rescue is really, really simple. If somebody falls when they're in fall restraint, they can simply stand back up because they should be on the same level that they were walking on already. It's a very, very simple system. When we move to fall arrest, the systems and the components that you're connected to are doing absolutely nothing for you until after you go off that edge, until after you fall. And once you fall, they should be designed so that they stop you before you can hit a lower level or the ground, and then arrest that fall and bring those forces down to an acceptable level, which is 1,800 pounds by OSHA, or an average of either 900 or 1,350 pounds by ANSI, depending on what product it is. Fall restraint in Oregon, we need 3,000 pound anchors. In fall arrest, we need 5,000 pound anchors or 2-to-1 safety factor. So I have the correct.
So do you see how that competent person needs to be very well versed in regards to all of these requirements? Oregon OSHA has a very good state program, and I don't want you to think that I am saying that whatever Oregon OSHA says is good. I'm just saying they do a good job at explaining the difference between fall arrest and fall restraint, but the requirements are quite different from California. So you can look at these resources that I give you always with that understanding that every single state and nation may have an OSHA state approved program, which would make them or give them permission to come up with their own regulations. That's the reason why we have trigger heights in construction and general industry that are 4 feet and 7.5 foot, right? In general industry, federal establishments, we have that 4 and 6 foot trigger height. So those are the difference. Always take a look at them with a grain of salt whenever you're looking at videos from different states or examples from different states. Always know that that's something that you need to look back into your own state, in this case, California, and find out if it's the same or not. Types of active personal fall. So it's listed: personal fall arrest, personal fall restraint, positioning devices, which those are forbidden to be used as part of your fall restraint system, but they can be positioning because the person is doing work where they need to have that positioning device, and it could be used in the form of a belt. But there's a lot to know in regards to positioning devices as well. Full arrest system, use harnesses, not body belts. So a little bit of what we were saying and what the video showed. It also brings back that issue of the hierarchy of controls, right? Because we think, well, maybe that dog on a leash type of concept, it's better than actually allowing that person to fall. So you go through your analysis that way. Once you've identified the hazards, you go through knowing that you have to first look at how eliminating that hazard. Can we bring the work to a ground level? Do we really need to be on an elevated surface? And if we do, we start with the passive systems, our guardrails. And if we do that, or we can't do that, and we're going to provide a person with personal full arrest or personal full restraint, that we look first into the full restraint system before we start looking at the full arrest system. And then that you have an actual competent person to set it up and to make sure that it does comply with the requirements, because the regulations are very specific. And that way, that is the only way you're going to ensure compliance. So have your competent people, rely also on their qualified person in order to put together not just the actual type of system and make a decision on the type of system they're going to use, but also that it is compliant, and also issues such as, you know, training and teaching your people so that they can bring up good questions such as, hey, where's my anchorage point? And why are you choosing that as the anchorage point? Because we see a lot of violations where people hook onto, you know, piping or electrical conduit instead of a good anchorage point that it is rated for 5,000 pounds of tensile strength per worker that is attached to that anchorage point. All right, so 2 pages of fantastic information and links to each of the regulations that you need to look at depending on what your operation is at. And although this handout says fall protection in construction, it does bring to light all of those general industry regulation that I was talking about. And this is what I was saying. Subchapter 7 is for general industry safety orders. And when you go to subchapter 4, you would have all of the construction industry safety orders, right? So both included in this quick fact sheet, and I highly encourage you to look at that. The last thing I want to mention, so that we know how to go about looking at portable ladder compliance. I went off of the e-tool for Cal OSHA, and I wanted to put together something that my clients could use. And it's really straight from the Cal OSHA site, the e-tool. The problem is when you have an e-tool on site, the trainer or the person who's going to be performing training wouldn't be able to do good training by having there a computer that he needs to be clicking through the e-tool versus having a guide that he can print and have it in his hand or his iPad or whatever, and go over each of these requirements for portable ladder safety. So Cal OSHA Title 8 Code of Regulations 3276 says that in order to have compliance with the training requirements for portable ladders, you must go over 1 through 7, right? So it goes into why it's so essential to use ladders safely. And when it says that, you must do something in your discussion time during your training to actually bring to light why is it so important to use ladders safely. So you want to include the frequency and severity of injuries related to falls from ladders. So one of the things that I did here is just quickly put that information for the trainer. And as according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2020, there were 161 fatal work injuries nationwide, from which ladders were the primary source. There were 105 deaths from movable ladders in 2020 and 5 deaths from fixed ladders. You see why all that hoopla regarding fixed ladders? Because people are dying while climbing these fixed ladders. And a lot of people thought that, you know, just by having these cages, you wouldn't need any other form of fall protection. But historically, we've seen that people just get mangled whenever they fall as they travel up through a fixed ladder with that cage. We need better systems. And a lot of those are personal fall protection with a harness and a travel. And it's a nice gliding system where a person can go up and down while connected to the actual fixed ladder. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, review how to select the correct portable ladder. So selection, you have to talk about the types of ladders. And the best thing that a trainer can do is bring out the ladders that the workers use. So for this past training that I did at a warehouse where they send workers out on the field for installation. They actually had 3 types of ladder in the warehouse. They had fiberglass portable ladders, A-frame type of ladders. They had extension ladders, and they had articulated ladders. And so we brought them out and we went each of these 1 through 7, and we documented training so that you become compliant with the regulation. If OSHA is to show up, you have a way of showing that each of the workers that have access to those ladders, and when I say access, it's because anybody with access to the ladder, even though you don't assign them the use of a ladder, but just by the mere fact that they can access a ladder to change a bulb in their office, to reach a higher shelf in, whatever cabinetry you have somewhere in the office building, because of the fact that you allow them to have access to ladders, you must give them the training required by 3276. And once again, when you say 3276 is in the 3000s, which is general industry, the way if you also have to comply with this in construction is because when you go to the construction safety orders, it kicks you back to saying, oh, for training in regards to portable ladders, go to 3276 in the general construction orders. So they kind of sometimes just refer back and forth to construction to general, general to construction. And so the next one would be understanding how to perform maintenance, inspect, and remove damaged ladders from service. Number 4 is examining the correct way to erect them, including footing, support, top support, security, and inclination angle, understanding how to climb, how to work on ladders, including workers' position, points of contact. So a lot of good stuff that is included in the e-tool. But when you have an actual document where you can go through, these are the reports, then that trainer doesn't need to be Googling things as he goes along. He has it all in one handout. This is the actual picture from the Cal OSHA site where they do talk about ladder selection, the types of A-frame types of ladders, and the capacity of them, how to correctly select them. And so as you go through this guide, this is, for example, the 2 ways a ladder is supported, even self-supported like a step ladder, or non-self-supporting like an extension ladder. And then you get into inspecting them and when do you need to destroy them, and don't just throw them and put them in the trash, but actually destroy them. More on extension ladders. And I'll also give you a link to the American Ladder Institute. Oh my gosh, they have enormous amounts of information. And the reason I put it here is because they go through ladders 101, choosing the right ladder, and then they give you tips for inspection of the different types of ladders you may come across. Some of you have beautiful ladders that are so new and so different that you would have to have a different type of inspection sheet for those. And so you want to follow that. Great. So that was a quick review of what you needed to take a look at also in regards to ladders, and that if OSHA is to ever show up at your places of employment because of an issue with ladders and you cannot show compliance and with the regulation because the ladder was in poor condition and that's the reason why the worker fell, and then you can't prove that you trained this worker to recognize the hazard by inspecting the ladder, by setting it up correctly, etc., you will be cited. And that's mostly a serious violation which right now runs about 25 grand for any type of industry. So you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want the work with ladders is a serious matter. Make sure you are compliant. Okay, so let's see. We talked about that. We talked about this, the trigger heights, and then more examples on when, or how you identify fall hazards and how you look at these things. And through that handout that I showed you, you can find out what are the requirements in the Cal OSHA or the OSHA.gov federal requirements under the new rule. And we talked about the changes that may come up in California. There's a proposed rule that you have access to through the link I also provided. We talked about the most effective controls and the least effective, which is PPE. That's the actual hierarchy of controls that we were discussing. Make sure that you have qualified people, competent people, and that you put the requirements for these people to be in their job description. So this is where you marry your responsibility as a safety director with your link to that HR person, human resources, because you do want to get people that are trained, experienced, and they're willing to work as a competent person, and that they do have the knowledge, right? The systems that we have go from guardrail safety nets, fall arrest systems, repair service and assembly pits, travel restraint systems. So there's a ton of systems out there, and each of those have a specific requirement, right? And depending on the actual material that they are made of, there's also different requirements for wood, for pipe, for structural steel, because the regulation will tell you exactly, you know, the actual strength of each of these components, and they will tell you the distance between the posts, etc., and the actual requirements for toe boards. That's one of the most common violations with guardrails that I find in construction and in general industry, because toe boards are intended to stop items from falling to a lower level as a person passes by, because people can get hit in the head. And many times we're missing toe boards because, you know, you're just being lucky. No one has gotten hit in the head with anything. You don't need a toe board. But in reality, the requirement is there. So take a look. If there's people passing underneath, the requirement for the toe board is there. So different requirements for safety nets, and training needs to be very specific for that purpose. In regards to personal fall arrest systems, make sure that a competent person is performing the training, that they actually spend time taking a look at each of the components and allowing workers to know why they're doing the work they're doing, the way they're doing it, where are they anchored from, is it an appropriate anchorage point, which is a huge issue with our fall arrest systems. And allow them to question, why are you anchoring me to a light fixture or plumbing or a conduit or wiring? So equipment failure inspections are very important. Make sure that they inspect prior to use. Show them how to inspect, not just by saying, I just inspected, but it would be good for you to purchase an actual video so that they know what that inspection looks like. And there's many videos or solutions through software. Some of you already have training assigned to your workers through software, and it's really good because it'll show them what that inspection is all about. You know, how to go through the webbing, how to start that inspection that needs to be prior to each use. So that's for that. Heavy soiling. So a lot of the issues that we have out there in the field is workers leaving their full protection just anywhere, getting grease and oil, etc. And I think I ran out of time. The last thing, fall and rescue. Rescue is super important. If you did not plan how these people are going to be rescued when they fall, you will be cited. That's a serious violation. And I find that most times when people are on harnesses, the employer thinks that just calling 911 will get their employees rescued in case of a fall. That's not the case. You have to set up that rescue prior to starting. And finally, I did mention ways to recognize fall hazards at your fixed and non-fixed locations. We talked about the portable ladder safety and the OSHA training requirements and some of the requirements for passive and active fall protection systems. So this is Alba Vazquez. Guys, I'm very happy to bring you updates every single month. Ask your questions. Please answer the surveys. Thank you for being here. I know a lot of your names are always following us every month, and we appreciate that. So if you come up with questions, send us your question. You can email it or text it or chat with us, and I'll see you next month. In the survey, there's a space also to suggest topics that you're interested in, and we'll welcome that input as well. So thank you, Lindsay. You guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you next month.
Well, thanks so much, Alba. Yes, take care, everyone. We'll also be sending out the slides and the recording after this. So look out for that later today.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Everyone enjoy your weekend. Thanks again.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.